is this a new meeting or is it me who's new, like on the invite list? Because
Yes. Okay.
if
Yeah.
so, if either way, I would welcome an
I was
introduction of what this thing is.
when you joined just now, Marcin. I thought, oh, good, Marcin is able to make it, and then I couldn't remember if I had just recently invited you or if you'd always been on the invite. And I apologize you were not always on the invite, but
I mean, I have plenty of meetings to attend, so no worries.
well,
Oh, I'm happy.
Yeah, I did add you recently because right, technical writers are part of the UX team, and we also want to get better about including you in UI copy feedback early and often. And yeah, I kind of felt I was remiss to not have invited you in the first place. So I'm sorry it was late, but I'm glad you made it. We share designs here. We share work in progress. We share stuff around process. Yeah, it's basically what the handbook outlines, and then occasionally we'll go off topic and talk about green rivers and stuff. So yeah, but I'm really glad you joined.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, and normally Libor Vonk also joins from the ecosystem team because there's a lot of crossover between what ecosystem does and what the plan group, plan stage in particular do. But I think we'll go ahead without him. And oh, thank you.
He mentioned he's not coming.
Not attending meeting conflict. Okay. So let's make sure that we read what he put in the agenda before we're done.
All right.
Do you have any other questions, Marcin, about? Okay. Cool.
I will go ahead and talk briefly then about jobs to be done. Too many windows. Okay, can y'all see my screen? Awesome, thank you. I'm just going to kind of walk through the whole process. I'll just try to keep it kind of succinct because I know we've got other things to touch on, but this started out, obviously we have a KPI for it, but it started out with Mike setting up the call with myself and Gabe to kind of start the conversation. And we started off by having just a sync meeting. I think it was maybe an hour-long discussion where we kind of evaluated all of the existing all of the existing jobs rather that we have defined for plan. A little bit of quick history on that. We created those jobs, and Alexis, keep me honest here if you think of anything that I'm saying incorrectly, but we created those kind of on the fly for the CMS issue tracking that I did several months ago. So it was myself, Alexis, Gabe, Keenan, Mark, that might have been it initially. So it was several months ago, and we kind of just all got together on a call and just wrote through what we thought were going to be the primary jobs. We didn't do any validation at that time. We knew we weren't doing any validation at that time and that we would need to go back and do that at some point. So this is the start of that process.
Yeah, we went through that mural board, and it was all like based on assumptions, and it was based on like job to be done mapping, but it was just like what our PMs kind of thought, you know, like, oh, I would want this. And we're like, cool, like you are sort of the persona, but we need to validate these. So
right.
Yeah,
exactly. So that was definitely the case. And again, this is what we're trying to do with this, but we are starting with just two. So we went through and tried to identify the ones that are most closely related to issue tracking, and that brought up the conversation of what exactly is issue tracking. You know, that in itself is kind of a big topic that can encompass planning. It can mean collaborating on work, actually doing the work, you know, reviewing the progress after the fact and being able to provide feedback on whether or not you provided value with your outcome. So there's a lot that went into that discussion, but that's kind of where we started here, was just looking at those jobs. We picked a couple and then determined that maybe they needed to be refined a little bit. And I think where we landed, all of the discussion is in here, and I'll put this link, this was the actual meeting agenda, but I'll put this link in our agenda as well in case anyone wants to look over it, was we landed on these two jobs here. plan and collaborate on value delivery, and make sure we're shipping the right things. And some of this was based off of what Gabe had put on our handbook page regarding kind of the vision for jobs for plan in particular. But we felt that those were nice, succinct ways to start to identify what these jobs could potentially be. So from there, I created a research issue, and we've got these 2 jobs outlined here. What we also realized is that we need to not only validate the jobs, but we need to validate the performers of those jobs as well. So that's part of what we're also striving to do with this. So created a screener survey, of course. There is a discussion guide as well that kind of outlines what we're looking to accomplish. This is based on a template. So the research team had already defined a series of questions for us to use for this, but I think we did go back and tweak a little bit of them recently as well. But the next steps are to conduct a series of interviews. So we are looking to do, I think, 10 interviews total. We're going to start with 5, get the feedback from these users. We're using Parker, the product manager, as our target user. We're going to conduct 5 interviews, take that feedback, go back and revise any questions that we might need to, maybe revisit the jobs themselves, and then do an additional 5 interviews to just kind of validate where we are in terms of progress. But that's essentially it in a nutshell. Is there anything else here that I might need to touch on? I don't think there is.
Sharing the KR so we can talk about why this is important now and then what it sets us up to do next.
Absolutely. So here's the KR. Do you want me to talk through that, Mike, or did you have anything specific you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, because I don't think I want to just read through it. But what I do want to highlight is that so we want to do category maturity scorecards next quarter for issue tracking, boards, quality management, and compliance management. Those are the categories that affect this team. And in order to do a category maturity scorecard, we need jobs to be done, and those jobs to be done need to be validated. So I think the importance of validating them is that we're phrasing them in the language of the job performer, of Parker, or what's your compliance management persona's name again, Austin?
Cameron.
Cameron, that's right. Or Cameron, or the job performer for boards. Who is that, Alexis? I'm drawing a blank. Is it Parker also?
That'd be like Parker and Delaney.
Yeah.
And then maybe also Sasha, sort of.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's primary job performers, and then there's there are people who are, they're maybe not primary job performers, but they participate with that primary job performer. And what stood out to me that's kind of funny and interesting was on that page that Holly mentioned, the plan jobs to be done in the handbook. The job statements are sort of identified as the jobs. Maybe could we pull that open, Holly, that handbook page? I think it's in that Google Doc you had open.
Okay, yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, there they are. Valid. Oh no, yeah, they're in there toward the top. I think Holly froze.
Am I back?
You're back.
Can you hear me? Okay, good. Sorry about that. Is this the page?
Yeah. So
Okay.
what kind of stood out as sort of humorous, and I don't know, I find humor in a lot of things lately with the kind of world we live in, is that the jobs are actually these headlines: plan and collaborate on value delivery. What we're calling job statements down below are actually pretty low level. They're like what you'd consider maybe a task or user story. So that's something to be wary of and cautious of. And I think Austin, you and I have talked about how to bring the level of abstraction a bit higher, and you've made some changes in the the compliance handbook pages to propose a higher abstraction of jobs. So think of a job as something that if you put the phrase "help me" in front of it, help me plan and collaborate on value delivery. If that makes logical sense when you put that phrase in front of it, it's probably closer to a job to be done. And then the lower level things like what we're calling job statements are sort of the how, like how we perform that job, or what assists us in doing it in terms of like a solution. So
I have a
anyhow.
question about that KR. So there's a table in there that has the different categories, and it's looking for, I'm assuming, like a merge request associating or an issue to validate jobs to be done. But we map jobs to groups, but not to categories. So I guess I'm kind of confused to say, like, in that instance of like planning, how do we know exactly what category that's solving? I assume it's possible that job could span multiple categories.
It is possible, yeah. And I think we'll just have to take it case by case. And I think for you, you know, I think how we think about stages and groups is different from categories too. Like there are some groups that are responsible for multiple categories. There are some stages that those teams roll up to a category. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I think that happens. And so a category is different from like a stage group. Like Alexis, your group is responsible for definitely more than one category. Yeah,
yeah, and in plan especially, we try to like, I don't know, we've been trying not to think about it category wise in general, just for that exact problem, right? Like things span different things in plan, and then of course they span different things across the product. Mm-hmm. So it is a little difficult.
I mean, category might be a way to maybe, instead of talking about the product capabilities in terms of how we structure teams, and talking about product capabilities more from a user benefit lens. I think there's definitely some iteration that could happen, like boards. That's I don't know, like, what do people do with boards? Maybe that's what boards ought to be called, but we're not going to solve that problem here. Not today.
I know. I think we were working on it with Jeremy, and then he left. But you know what? We'll get back there. It's all good.
Cool. So
yeah, I guess where I was struggling is I don't really know how to contribute to this table because it's mapping to individual categories. Like, should it be groups instead of categories? And then
yeah, I'm not sure what you mean by. I think let's see. Let me make sure I understand what the MR link is supposed to go to. Could you open DAST, Holly? Just so that DAST to MR. It's yeah, just in that table row. So it looks like this is a change against DAST's handbook page where they list their jobs to be done. So for you, Austin, it would be, you already have an MR, right? Because you made an MR to improve the abstraction level of the jobs.
I did for like the jobs that compliance is trying to address, not explicitly for compliance management or audit reports or audit events, although those jobs do tie to solutions that are in those categories, if that makes sense.
Yeah, use your, based on the jobs that you are currently aware of, and then what you learned through validation, it's possible that only one of those categories are relevant in terms of having jobs defined for them. But yeah, I think the way that what we call categories and how they're phrased is also open to iteration. I think the more we learn about the jobs and validate them, the more refinement we can do on our category names. So maybe in your case, they both point to the same MR. Nothing wrong with that.
Okay.
So what I'm hearing you say is the jobs that you've identified so far wrap around both audit events and compliance management.
And audit reports, but yeah.
and audit
I was
reports.
thinking I would maybe just make one row, put in the label for group compliance, and then it would have compliance management, audit reports, audit events, linked to the MR from last fall, and then the update 1.2 from just last week.
Cool.
Okay, can do that.
Yeah, so Holly's ahead of the curve. You already have a couple weeks head start on this. And so as Austin and Alexis, as you start this process of validating the jobs, I think Holly's a really good resource. Of course, you can reach out to me. Martin, I would love your input because I just think that as someone who is responsible for the documentation and the UI copy experience around these categories, that you're going to have a really good idea of, what are the nouns and verbs that we're using, and do they actually make sense, right? Or are we just creating a word salad yet again? Which, there's nothing wrong with that, but the word salad has to be appetizing.
Sure.
Yeah.
I have to say though, with jobs to be done, because they are sometimes super abstract, my mind blanks. So
Me too.
I will need, like, it is a word salad sometimes, but
Yep.
I don't know, I need to learn.
Yeah, no, I hear you. They're really tough to do. And I think the validation of them helps us just have more natural words, so that if a Parker or a Cameron, like they see that GitLab can help them, do this thing, that they're not going to have to make assumptions about what we're talking about in terms of capabilities. So, and then next quarter we'll do category maturity scorecards, so that it's important that we do that this quarter, the validation. So far, I think our process is pretty streamlined. The handbook page is comprehensive. The way we screen and schedule people is streamlined, and Adam have been really supportive in helping us navigate the tooling. But
Any other questions?
Yeah, I wanted to make one point. I listed a link to where the jobs to be done YAML file is. Most jobs are in there, but I did want to highlight that, like, I don't see the other groups from manage in there. So whenever people do get to the point of readdressing where their job statements live, make sure they all go to this YAML page, and then you can reference it with a partial on any other handbook page.
do you know, does the handbook page generator use this YAML to how is this used? I'm a little bit lost.
Yeah.
I see the grades. Okay, the grades are also in the handbook. Okay.
Yeah, so this kind of like serves as like the single source of truth that you would author, and then you can reference these slugs essentially through a partial statement on other pages. So I guess it prevents people from having to update multiple places. But
So
Is
kind of
the grade? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Martin.
so kind of like the team YAML thing, or stage in groups. Still don't know how it works, but I see the parallel.
Is I haven't read, so I'm going through this journey of JTBD validation for the first time. Is the grade part of the output or part of the result of the validation, or how does the grade even happen?
I know for CMS, the grade was just a guesstimate initially, and then we attempted to validate it, obviously as part of the CMS process. So I'm wondering the same thing actually as well, where these grades have come from and what they mean.
I thought that was from the CMS.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. But even
and then it asks like a source, which I think is supposed to source to the CMS like research that was done. That's my theory, but it sounds like what you're saying is it was just a guess. So when do we actually get a true grade? I don't know.
Well, it was from my understanding, at least for plan, it was a guess initially. But the grade, if I recall, was a representation or a reflection of the grade of the category, not of the job itself. So I'm curious about the specific grades for each job. Now, I'm trying to remember if we ended up with a grade for each job. I think we did have a numerical score, but I don't recall us giving it a grade like this. So maybe they're just correlating it to that numerical score, but I'm curious about that as well.
There's no mention of a job grade on the JTBD validation handbook page, or even an idea of like scoring a JTBD during the validation method. So I guess we don't have to worry about it yet.
Right. Also, there's a confidence area. So I don't think there's great documentation on what goes into confidence, but I think what you'll find most of the time is people just put in some sort of reflection of where the maturity of that job statement is. And it might just be, we've just done research around it and that's it. We haven't done CMS or anything further to score it.
Cool.
Mike, did you want to?
For you, Holly, in this process, what are the next
Right
steps?
Right now, I'm waiting on people to sign up. I saw that we've got our first response this morning to our survey, but I don't see anything yet on my calendar. And unfortunately, we had scheduled this to go up through the 17th, and we still don't seem to have anybody lined up for it. So my next step is to follow up with Anne, who I think is out today. I think Caitlin maybe was the other person that I've been working with, to check with her and see if there's anything else we can do to try to get some folks in pretty quickly and get the actual interviews conducted. And Mike, did you want
to? The Parkers that we want to talk to, they don't have to be current GitLab users, right? It could
correct.
Be, okay, so that should be a pretty big net. I wonder why we haven't. Maybe if it went out on like a Friday, maybe we resend it on a weekday. I don't know.
That's a good idea. I'll check with Caitlin and see if she has any recommendations on how we can improve it. Did you want to touch on the way that the job sample statement was written at all, or did we want to revisit that? I know that was a big topic that we had talked about.
The way the job statement was written?
Yeah, they had the sample job statement that we determined was not.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I definitely get confused by all some of the examples.
Gosh, yeah, and I want to see how this process goes first before I open up this can of worms. But I have a current hypothesis, I think that's the right word, an assumption that by trying to follow the how does it go? When, so that I can, is that kind of how it goes? I'm drawing a blank right now. So the situation, the
when blank, I want to blank, so that blank.
Situation, goal, outcome. So that grammar, I think, is why, by trying to fit things into that grammar, that's why our job to be done phrases are so low level. They're not abstract enough, because we're trying to draft some word soup that fits that grammar. But when Nick Post gave me that hint about putting help me in front of it, that's when we realized, oh, now we have the right abstraction for our jobs. And they seem maybe high level, and it's like, how do we, if we're doing a CMS validation, how do we take this really high level job and validate the product against it? That's because we have jobs, user stories, and tasks. And so that grammar, I think, is pulling us down into the user story level of abstraction. And so depending on how this validation process goes, if that job statement grammar doesn't seem to really get us anywhere, like so far it really hasn't, I want to make a proposal to maybe reframe it as something else, like a user story or something. And I've seen other JTBD validations done on other categories where the jobs are pretty low level. It's something like, trigger a pipeline or watch a pipeline. And I think a valid job statement would be the level above that. Like, why am I watching a pipeline? Why is the pipeline being triggered? Right. So yeah, thanks Holly for reminding me about that. I forgot that that was kind of one of the working premises behind picking those job statements on the plan handbook page that were not in the job statement grammar, but just right, like delivering a product and making sure it's the right thing, that kind of level. Yeah.
No problem. I know we've only got a couple of minutes left, so I stopped sharing. If we want to touch on the other parts of the agenda.
Yeah, I kicked mine next week. No worries.
I could talk next week as well.
Do you want to talk about it async? Like maybe a topic in Slack or something?
I think it would be better, even probably with more people here, just to have collective thinking around my topic that I brought up. The general pitch is, after having a little synchronous discussion around like cascading settings and stuff with a few PMs and Daniel, I just can recognize the fact that I'm a part of the problem of doing too many MVCs and not coming together and synthesizing it on a bigger picture. So trying to stop that, but also while serving the needs of users at the same time. I would love some bigger design ideas from the other teammates, how to combat that.
Yeah, that's a really, I think when you just said when there's more people on the call, I think that's a good topic for the UX channel or the UX co-working channel, because I think other folks have explored ways to do that. Like CI/CD has Think Big sessions. I know Secure has also done some of that to try to think big and then still act small through small MVCs. So I think that's a good wider topic. And then Alexis, yours, I'd love to give asynchronous feedback or at least look at what input you need on the UI copy. So that'd be a good one for the UX co-working channel too, instead of this smaller group.
I'll go through this and then also UI copy async.
Okay. Cool.